Well, thank you for agreeing to an interview. I really appreciate it.
Happy to.
So it's been over 4 months now. We're the only state in the country with an uncertified statewide race. Just absent all of the legal drama, what do you say to North Carolina voters who are just perplexed at the fact that we still don't have a winner in this race?
Well, it's democracy continuing to be in action. Obviously, there's outstanding legal issues that need to be resolved. And these are legal issues that were brought up prior to the election. And we still need to have them adjudicated. And so as Judge Griffin continues to move forward with his claims and having them heard, we look forward to having the Court of Appeals now hear this case and to continue to see and monitor how the courts rule in that.
Mm-hmm. We wanted to come to you to talk about this because you're chair of the party has been invested in this litigation from the beginning, but also because Judge Griffin has declined to comment on this case. So can you sort of walk me through what the party's role is in this litigation and whose idea it was to bring this forward?
Sure. So prior to the election, obviously we work with all of our candidates. And then in the case where we saw Judge Griffin's race continue to tighten up post-election and then go into recount, we were very much engaged with him during that recount process. So both the first recount, the second recount. And then as he continued to move forward, he is the named individual on these cases. We continue to work with him and his team to assist and monitor his activities when he's pursuing these legal actions.
But what was the conversation like when the vote count flipped? I believe that was, 10 days after the election? What did it look like from that moment of saying, here's the legal avenues we're going to pursue?
Well, again, you go through the recount process, and initially there was, we'll call it 6 buckets that ourselves as well as Judge Griffin were reviewing during the recount process. 3 of those were able to be resolved during the recount process. So whether that was, deceased voters, things along those lines, those actions that needed to be taken during that process. What was outstanding were still 3 items that needed to be litigated. Items that we had previously raised and had concerns on. And so those issues continue to persist. Absent of this electoral question, these issues, these cases would have still had to have been resolved. And so you have this active case that continues to pursue through the court system in conjunction with what's going on with the election question. But regardless, you still would have had these 3 cases or 3 issues that still had to be resolved.
Okay. Well, before we get into all the legal arguments, I just want to ask you about this big figure of voters, because we've heard it over and over. There's over 65,000 voters whose ballots are being challenged. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you've seen they've been protesting. They've written about it. What do you say to these people who say, why should you be able to throw my ballot out if I didn't do anything wrong? If you're just saying the State Board of Elections did something wrong?
Well, what we had raised previously was questions about the process by which the state board allowed individuals to be on the voter rolls with incomplete voter registration data. We had asked them to have a cure process. They refused. We continued to pursue that through the legal remedies, finally taking that case to court. That case obviously wasn't heard prior to the election, but those cases and those issues still persist, where the state board is acknowledged that the form that was active was not proper and needed to have it cleaned up. And so we want to make sure that those individuals that are on the voter rolls are allowed to vote. And in many cases, as you've seen, those individuals had every right to register to vote. But what was not done was by the Board of Elections in a proper manner. And we'd asked for a cure process. They declined to pursue that. So that's where we continue to find ourselves, is making sure that those that are on the voter rolls are allowed, and those that are allowed to vote do so.
So like you said, you and the RNC litigated most of these issues before the election. I believe those were filed around August or something like that.
Right.
When it came before Judge Myers, I believe he said that there could be merit to these claims, but regardless, there won't be any relief for this coming election. Does that inform how you see the challenges now? Because it would still be relief for the election that already happened. It's what they keep raising as the Purcell principle, that you can't change things after the election.
No, and I appreciate Judge Myers' ruling on this issue. But again, the issues persist. They still have to be adjudicated. They still have to need to be resolved. And now the case is before the North Carolina Court of Appeals for them to hear and to make their determination on the merits of those cases.
But if a court were to order relief in this circumstance for this election, how is it possible that that relief could be tailored to only one race when there's plenty of other races that were decided by much smaller margins than this one, that if you start throwing out votes, it could flip those as well?
Yeah, and again, this is the issue that's before the courts to be able to decide. And again, the issues that were raised previous. We'd asked for relief, understood what Judge Meyer had indicated, but we still have to have these issues adjudicated. And that's where Judge Griffin is right now, asking for the courts to make a determination upon the merits of his case.
But do you have a specific remedy you want the court to order? Because there's many ways that could go. I mean, they could say, we're going to throw out all of the ones you've asked for only for this race. They could say, we'll hold a new election. They could say, we're going to go through all of those votes individually and see if they're eligible. Is there one of those that you're asking for, or are you just leaving it up to the court?
Ultimately, that's the court's decision. What we want are the merits of those cases to be heard and decided.
Okay. So like you said, you brought the voter registration numbers challenge way before the election. Was that sort of a means to lay the groundwork for an outcome such as this one?
No. Again, we had raised these issues well in advance, and it finally got to the point where the only relief was to file the case within the court system. We petitioned the state board to be able to provide that relief to find a cure process. We'd gone through the administrative rules making process to find that relief, and ultimately we then had to end up into the courts to be able to seek that relief. So nothing was, I wish you could say you had a crystal ball to be able to envision this type of scenario, but we don't. What we look at when we're going through these processes is where are the issues that we have with regards to the rules of elections, and where we do not believe that the rules of the election are consistent or they are out of compliance, especially with the state constitution, is when we will raise and address those issues.
Do you think that if President Trump had lost North Carolina by a small margin, you would have brought a similar legal challenge to this one to challenge the results?
It's tough to get into the hypothetical game. We can only deal with what was in front of us. And at that time, Judge Griffin's case, and obviously there was a couple of other races that we went through that recount process with some of the state legislative races, and they made those determinations themselves on how they wanted to proceed.
Okay, so I want to get into the buckets of voters, because there's 3 now. And the biggest one is those voters that don't have a driver's license or Social Security in the initial poll of the database. Now, of course, later the state board submits an affidavit saying, well, actually, half these people did submit it. But regardless, as I understand it, the GOP's argument is when you don't have these numbers, there's a chance that people could fall through the cracks and that someone who's ineligible could get on the rolls. Now, if that's the case, this litigation's been going on for 4 months. Why have we not been able to identify a single one of those voters who's actually ineligible for some reason?
Well, again, it goes back to making sure that the data was consistent and complete. And now you have the state board coming back and saying, well, we can actually do X, Y, and Z. Well, we asked you previously to go through your database, to review these individuals that are in question, and to be able to address the concerns. They're only now, after the fact, trying to address these concerns. And that goes back to the concerns that we've had with the state board, where the data, and then it's not just with the voter registration information, but a large part of it is where you have inconsistent and or incomplete data sets. And so even when we're going through the recount process and we're asking for data polls, they're slow, or there's delays on being able to pull that information in a timely manner in which you're having to make real-time decisions. And so with this particular set of individuals, again, I'm very sympathetic to them because, again, they did nothing wrong. What occurred was from the State Board of Elections, where they had an improper form that allowed people to register during that time that did not collect all of the data that was necessary to be able to verify who they are. What we continue to ask for is to make sure that the individuals that are on the voter rolls are able to participate in our elections given our state laws and constitution.
But have you done any sort of audit of that list of voters to try and look through and determine yourselves if this person actually possesses the qualifications to vote? And if so, has any of that led you to believe that there's someone on that list who isn't eligible, who isn't a citizen or something like that?
Sure. We are at the same mercy as everybody else when we're looking at these data sets. The information that comes from the Board of Elections, and then being able to then take that and use that off of other data sets. I'm going to allow Judge Griffin and his team to be able to address any of those data sets. But again, what we continue to look at is incomplete information coming from the state board.
Okay. So the next category is what Griffin calls the never residents, the adult children who were born to North Carolina residents but live abroad, but never lived here. The legislature passed the law that allowed those people to vote over a decade ago. They've participated in dozens of elections. Why is it a problem now?
What we've continued to see are individuals that have no claims to North Carolina, per se, to be able to participate in our elections. So being a resident of North Carolina, being able to have claims to North Carolina. So those are issues that continue to be persistent, questions that were raised previous, again, to the election. And Judge Griffin is asking for the courts to be able to review and determine on the merits of their claims.
But hypothetically, that would be within the legislature's purview to change. Why did the party never push for the lawmakers to address this in previous legislative sessions?
There'd been conversations, but at this point, Judge Griffin is looking to have the courts be able to review the status of these individuals and whether or not they have actual ability to participate in North Carolina elections when they have no residency claims to North Carolina.
Okay. That last bucket is the military and overseas voters who didn't show an ID. Mm-hmm. Now, the State Board of Elections approved an exemption for those types of voters. It wasn't challenged at the time by the Republican Party or by Judge Griffin. Why is it a problem now?
Well, again, it's inconsistent with our state constitution. Our state constitution that was passed mandates that individuals show of an ID. So whether or not you show up in person or do you voted by absentee mail, well, you still had to be able to present a form of ID. And so Judge Griffin is asking for the courts to be able to provide clarification on that data set as well.
But why did he only challenge voters who came from 6 primarily Democratic counties in this bucket?
That was the data that was available to us at the time. So again, it goes back to when we're asking for data that comes from the Board of Elections. This was the data that was available at the time when they went through the process of review and putting those lawsuits together.
But couldn't you see a court having a hard time making the decision to treat voters in different areas differently, to say, we'll throw out military and overseas voters from blue counties, but not red counties who did the same thing?
Well, again, that's what ultimately going to be up to the courts to make that determination, to review the merits of what Judge Griffin has brought forward, and to be able to ask for the courts to be able to make an unbiased review of the claims and to be able to put out their opinions.
Some state lawmakers held a press conference not too long ago about this specific bucket of challenged voters. And they noted that one of the voters challenged for this reason was Captain Rebecca Lobach. She, of course, was the Army soldier who was killed in the D.C. plane crash. What would you say about having her vote discounted for this reason?
Again, I'm sympathetic to any voter. We want everybody to be able to participate in our democracy that's able to participate.
And hypothetically, she would be able to participate.
I guess
she was an Army soldier.
I'm not going to speak to one particular individual and their merits, because again, when we start looking at in each individual, the circumstances change. But by and large, our guiding principle has been we want everybody that has the right to participate in North Carolina elections to participate.
So we've probably got some time left before this is ultimately decided. We'll hear from the Court of Appeals, hear from the North Carolina Supreme Court, maybe take a turn back into federal district court.
Sure.
If you ultimately prevail in this case, and through whatever remedy the court orders, they take Riggs off the court and put Griffin on, what sort of precedent do you think this creates, not just in North Carolina, but nationwide? Is this setting up the possibility that anytime there's a narrow loss, you can pick away at different issues of registration until you wind up on top?
Well, again, I go back to the facts that all that we're continuing to seek is guidance from the courts on what should or should not be allowed when we're talking about the participation of voters. Making sure that every voter that has the right to participate in elections is allowed to do so. And those individuals that are in question, we have a resolution on their status.
Well, it seems it would be a different thing to ask the court to essentially say, we think these are issues in how this election was conducted, and we'd like you to direct the Board of Elections to address those for future elections. But that's not what the lawsuit has claimed. The lawsuit has claimed that Judge Griffin is the rightful winner of the election and he should be instated as the Supreme Court justice. So, I mean, what's the distinction? It's not guidance. That's a
Sure.
change.
No, it is being able to take a look at those individuals that participated in this past election. And again, on guidance that we asked for previous instructions from the courts. No relief was provided at that point. Judge Griffin is asking for the courts to review the merits of his claims and to provide guidance in the ruling.
Right. Well, I think that's all I've got for you, but is there anything I didn't ask about that you want to speak on, any aspects of the case?
I don't think so. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you today.
All right. Well, I thank you for your time.